Why did a Mexican training ship collide with the Brooklyn Bridge? What is the story here? We have a great guest for you today, a mariner and maritime historian, Sal Mercogliano from the YouTube channel What's Going On with Shipping, joins us next. Sal, when we talked a couple years ago, you told us the story about how you got interested in shipping and maritime history. Can you take us back there again? How did you get interested in this industry and this topic?
Sure. So I grew up in New York City. My dad owned a business down there, and one of the things he did is he bought a boat, and we used to go fishing off the southern shore of Long Island. And he loved the fish, deep sea fishing, bluefish, tuna, shark. I hate fish. I just can't stand to eat fish. I just despise it. But I would go out with him every time because I love driving the boat. I was out there to drive the boat, and everything about the boat was all me. And when you go 50, 100 miles offshore, the southern shore of Long Island, that's the main channel for going into New York Harbor. So the Ambrose Channel is right there. You see the ships coming in and out, and that just had an appeal for me for some reason. Wanted to get on a boat and go see the world, and I did it. I had a chance to do it. I met my wife on a boat, so I can't complain. My wife is Navy too, so we've got that in common. Oh, it took me everywhere. As I always say, I've literally sailed the seven seas. I've been on 6 of the 7 continents. Australia, the one I haven't been to is Australia. Been to Antarctica, very cold. I did the appeals, not there anymore to go there. I got that, did that one. But it was great. I mean, for 4 years, got to sail. Then I got to work ashore for the maritime industry. So I got the perspective from being on the deck plates. I got the perspective from being ashore. And then I totally swallowed the anchor, came ashore and started doing the history of it. And so I got my master's in maritime history, nautical archaeology, did a PhD in maritime studies, and then kind of morphed into talking about maritime policy and what's going on with shipping today. And that eventually led me 4 years ago to starting the YouTube channel, What's Going On with Shipping.
Which, by the way, is amazing. I encourage everyone to check it out. We first met talking about the war between Russia and Ukraine and what was happening in the bodies of water around there and how critical it was. And really the pandemic too, Sal, taught us all about shipping a little bit more than I think we all knew about what it actually took to take things from one part of the world and get them to another. You're very familiar with New York, though, as you just mentioned. What do we need to know about the East River where this accident happened to understand why those conditions matter to this story?
Sure. So, I mean, the East River is a busy river. I mean, it doesn't have large ship traffic through it, but it has a lot of small ship traffic. So, if you look at any maritime tracking app or just go to the East River, you'll see it. There are vessels going up it all the time. It's got a wicked current that runs through it every 6 hours. That tide flips. There's an area on the river called Hellgate. It gives you an idea of the river. It gives you an idea of exactly what we're talking about. It's a river that has almost no current. So when left, the Mexican training ship left, there was almost no current in the river at that time, but it can run up to about 3 knots right there, and at some points up to 5 knots. And up at Hellgate, you get this swirling water because of the rocks and the confluence of rivers right there. It is a tough river, and there's a lot of traffic. And of course, you have other things like obstructions, like bridges and a whole batch of other things. And that's what happened when the Mexican training vessel pulled out.
You watched this along with the rest of us as the images were posted to social media. It's a lot to take in. It's very scary to watch. Thankfully, we don't have more people that have been killed, but we know 2 people have died. We know there are others suffering from their injuries. What do you think happened here, Sal?
So every maritime incident in the world happens from one of 2 things. It's a human error or a mechanical error. And most of the times the mechanical error are caused by humans. And so that tends to be the things we look at. Watching the video, and I actually did kind of a live stream that night, and then I went in and I edited that down, and then I just posted a video today where I really spent the day just looking at as much video, and there's a lot of video on this. There's a lot out there. What becomes apparent is this: the ship pulled off the berth right around 8:20, 8:22, roughly around that time. It's a Navy training ship, so one of the things that Navy training ships love to do is look smart coming off the dock. I mean, they want to make a big show of themselves. They want to demonstrate their seamanship. They want to look good. And in the case of this vessel, it's exactly what they wanted. The ship was lit up. Part of the crew, about 100 of the cadets, there was 277 people on this ship. About 100 of the cadets are up in the rigging. They have lights up there. And, because of the way the wind was setting northward, as they cast off their lines, the vessel kind of drifted off the berth. And then what we saw is the ship engaged its engine. It has an auxiliary engine. It usually uses sail to sail around, but in harbors and restricted waters, they'll use the engine. It backed out. Now there was a tug on standby, the Charles McAllister, which is an older tug, 57 years old, but it had been rebuilt several times. And really, all they wanted the tug to do was, if the training ship started to drift northward a little bit, was just to nudge it, to kind of keep it in the center of the river enough so that when it was in the center of the river, it came back around, gave it a push on the bow, and pointed it southbound. The plan was Cuauhtemoc was going to head down the river, anchor off of Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, refuel, and then it was heading to Iceland. It had a huge 200-day voyage planned. They were going to 15 different countries. Well, the ship got turned around and it engaged its engine. But what happened was, instead of going forward, it went reverse. And again, we're not sure why that happened. Was it, did somebody throw it in the wrong gear? That's unlikely, I would say. More than likely, what happened was that they probably had a mechanical or something error in the transmission or something along those lines. And when they engaged it, they put the throttle down, and instead of going forward, they went reverse. The problem was they were only a minute and a half from the bridge, and they did not have time. And that's very clear when you look at the speed of the vessel, because it's increasing speed as it's heading to the bridge. And if you look at the videos, especially the images from the Brooklyn bridge, from the Brooklyn side of the Brooklyn Bridge, it almost looks like that ship is steaming right towards you, the way the rounded stern is. But you can see a wake thrown off of it. You don't get a wake off a vessel unless you're under power.
If that's the situation, and by the way, we just watched the National Transportation Safety Board give a little bit of a press conference, their first one. They have a GO team on the ground there. They're doing an investigation. It's going to take months and months and months for answers, they said. And they didn't give us any information about the so-called mechanical failure that was mentioned on Saturday night. And you're painting a little bit of a different picture here, saying, well, maybe there is a mechanical failure, but it doesn't mean that the engine wasn't working. Because when I hear mechanical failure, I think, oh, it's not working. There was no engine. It just drifted into the bridge. What could have stopped that, Sal? I mean, the tugboat was there. Can the tugboat try to get in the way of the ship? I mean, what is possible in 90 seconds before hitting a bridge?
A couple of things. Number one, when you cast off, and especially larger commercial vessels, they'll have the tugs attached to the ship. And so you would typically have lines attached to the ship. Now, normal commercial vessels, tankers, container ships, they're configured for that. A sailing ship that's built on a model of an 1800 style vessel isn't designed to take a tugboat. So, for example, just hooking a line to it is difficult because, where do you lead it? And it can't really maneuver very well because you have all this rigging. This is all the standing rope, the stays, the shrouds. You've got this big, huge bowsprit on the bow, that big, huge pointy thing that sticks off the front. It's really hard to put a line onto a sailing vessel. So to hook a line to it is difficult. And so also, this is a ship that's meant to show you their prowess, their ability, their seamanship. And so, using as little help they can. It's a white vessel. You really don't want a nasty tugboat with used tires scuffing up the side. If you actually look at an image of the ship, it had a tarp down on the starboard side, on the right side, so that when the tug came into contact, they wouldn't actually scuff the paint. So the tug that could have been an issue that could have helped in some way. But again, they seem to be fine. The issue here was they'd gotten out in the stream, the center of the channel. Well, they'd gotten turned around. The tug had assisted them, gave it a push, got it turned around. The issue here seems to be purely a mechanical or, again, a human error. And I tend to lean toward mechanical because, again, if they thought they shifted it into forward gear and it didn't, there would be indicators for that. You would see lights trigger off and everything. But again, in 90 seconds, you don't have a lot of response. Even if you drop an anchor, anchors are really small on these ships. Plus, anchors aren't designed to stop you when you're underway. They're designed to hold you when you're not moving. And in truth, it's not an anchor that holds you. It's the anchor and the chain. And so you got to pay out the chain. And they would just not have enough drag on the bottom to slow them up. Basically, what the anchor would have been doing is just skipping along the bottom. And in truth, they had a lot of things to be worried about at that exact moment, because not only did they hit the bridge, which is the thing everyone fixates on, they ran aground. They actually hit Brooklyn. And there was a concern on the ship that they could have flooded the ship. I mean, the rudder's back there, the propeller's back there. And one of the reasons we see the tug racing down the side is it couldn't do anything at that point. You can't just throw a line. I mean, that doesn't work. You can't lasso the ship. What the tug was doing was racing to get on the other side so that after the ship came out from the bridge, it could grab it and get in its way and prevent it from hitting the next bridge, which is the Manhattan Bridge right after it, or prevent it going into the middle of the channel and potentially sinking. I mean, there was a lot going on in that. And again, what we tend to see is a short 15, 30-second, maybe
Yes.
a minute clip of it.
Well, what you're describing makes me think, wow, this could have been so much worse. It wasn't good. It certainly was scary to watch, but it could have been so much worse. I can't even imagine the ship continuing down the river towards the other bridge or being in the middle of that very busy waterway.
Oh, it could. I mean, again, one of the things you do, especially when you've been on a ship before, is you go through worst case scenarios, and you're going to second guess everything here. We've had two fatalities, and largely because those two crew members we believe fell from the rigging. They were up the very top. This is the foremast and the mainmast. The two forward masts have 5 yards across them sails, and if you look when the ship left on the bottom yards, there were 12 people, and then there was 10, then there's 8, then there's 6, and then there's 4. And what happens is those crew members are secured in place. One of the comments I hear a lot is they should have ordered the crew out of the rigging. That would have been the worst thing you could have done. Those crew members are in 5-point harnesses. They have what's called a monkey tail, a rope on them, and they're secured in place. They are designed, if you ever done like a high ropes course or, any sort of these things, you're in place so that if you fall off, you're not going to die. You're fixed in. If you would have ordered that crew to head it down, all of them would have had to get toward the center to the mast. They would have had to unhook, and they would have nothing to hold on to but ropes when they hit the mast. And understand the shock the mast took. Those are solid steel masts with wooden tops, and they move. The yards move. They pivot. And so there's no telling how many crew members, and largely young cadets, would have potentially have fallen. So 2 is horrendous because what happened on the upper mast was their safety lines probably severed, probably broke when the mast collapsed. But when you saw them dangling and hanging in those rigs, they're safe at least. At least they didn't. I mean, because that ship is 147 feet from the water to the very top of the mast. It's like falling off a 14-story building. And again, you're either falling on the deck or on the water. And believe me, it could have been much worse.
Wow. There's so many things I've been learning from our conversation, including just getting oriented and understanding that the ship was backing into the bridge. When I first saw it, I thought it was heading to the bridge. So that's important, as backing into the bridge. And that it looks like the engine was running. And there's a question about why. So we have that lingering question. 2 final questions for you, Sal. What do you already see sort of percolating online in your community or others in social media, myths that you're sort of seeing talked about regarding this event that you think is important to maybe add a little context?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, what's the procedure for leaving port? How many tugs should you have? One tug does seem a bit light to me. I mean, I would love to have, I'm never going to turn away having tugs when I'm leaving in and out of port. Well, as I said, this is a Navy training ship. They want to look sharp. They want to look good. They want as little help. But there's nothing wrong to have them out in the middle of the river there standing by for you when you're there. Especially New York's going to be thinking about this a lot because, next year in July, they're going to have the 250th anniversary of the United States. And there's going to be 36 of these tall-masted ships, including this vessel, if it's repaired in time, back in the harbor. And we're going to have to deal with those ships coming in and out of docks. So obviously inside the harbor, port operations is going to be a big thing to talk about. I think the other thing it does is it really highlights, the fact that we tend to forget, but we're really dependent on the ocean for commerce. We forget that all the time. I mean, go around New York any moment and you're going to see tugs and barges. You're going to see ships moving around all the time. And it's chaotic. It's an orchestrated kind of chaos. You're hearing a lot in the news today about air traffic control and all the problems we're having in the airports. Ports have almost none of that. Understand, it's literally the wild, wild west when it comes to ports. There's a thing called vessel traffic services, but they tend to deal with the big ships coming in and out of the ports. They really don't deal with the ships moving around in the port. And it's getting a little bit more busy. I mean, you've got ferries, you've got high-speed services on there, you got tugs and barges. And one of the things, that brings us together to talk once in a while is we're talking about shipping. We're talking about how important it is, whether it's a conflict in the Black Sea, disrupting shipping, whether it's the Houthi in the Red Sea, doing it, or it's an accident like the Dolly going into the bridge in Baltimore, or in this case, this ship hitting a bridge. And again, we're seeing that intersection between commerce and infrastructure too.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It definitely gives us a lot to think about all those stories you just listed, where shipping is a factor. One of the things from the news conference, I was surprised to hear that New York City had already arranged, and I'm speaking about the National Transportation Safety Board again, had already arranged to have more than 100 of the sailors off the ship and sent home to Mexico, and that there's some sailors that are still on the ship helping these repairs. And so there's this question about when are investigators going to get on the ship. Just a final question for you, Sal. Like, what are you anxious to find out? What are you watching for next in this story?
So first on that, remember this is a training ship, so it's an unusual crew because what you have is 100 150 cadets. This is from the Mexican Navy's Naval Academy, and the reason they run a ship like this is they don't have as many ships as, for example, as we do. If you're a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and you attend there, you get to go out on U.S. Navy ships. Well, Mexican Navy is not a large navy, and so smaller services like to have this. For example, the Coast Guard with the Eagle, which this ship is modeled on, as a matter of fact, looks very much like the Coast Guard bark Eagle. The crew that's left is the trained crew. This is probably some of the best in the Mexican Navy that are there as educators, trainers. So they're going to remain with the crew because they're going to have to get the ship out. They're going to have to sail it back for repairs. They're going to have to make it navigable so they can head back out. So that's going to take some work to do that. And so they're going to remain on board. For me, I watched the NTSB hearing too, and ironically, one of my classmates was in it. So a classmate of mine was in it, Brian Young. He was in the background there.
That's
He
right.
talked
He
a
was
little bit.
is he the lead investigator? Is he one of
He's a lead
that's
investigator and
right.
everything. Him and I went to college together. But one of the things I'm looking for is a couple of things. Obviously, I want to know about the engine. I want to know if that engine was in gear, what was going on with it before a ship ever leaves port. Jenna, you should do a series of tests. When you're dockside, you put the engine forward, reverse. You test everything. Was that tested? What's the maintenance record on this engine? Has there been problems in the past? Has there been an issue with the engine sticking in gear? Is the preventive maintenance going? I had an engineer send me a note about the type of diesel engine in here, and they said if the oil gets low in that transmission, it won't shift gears. You really got to keep up on that. So what it was that an issue, or the oil pressure, I should say. If the oil pressure gets low, this could happen. So I'd want to see that. What was the response from the crew on board? You want to get that. Most ships have what's called a vessel data recorder. So that will be measuring all the outputs from the ship, propulsion, speed. It'll have all the GPS data recorders in there so that you can kind of rebuild it. We don't tend to have a voice data recorder because that works great in a cockpit on a plane when you're sitting down and have a microphone in your mouth. When you're running around on a ship, there's no microphone. So you don't get a lot of audio. But what they're going to have a lot of is a ridiculous amount of video evidence from this because we've already seen that. So they're going to have to, see this from multiple angles, what happened, but really a reconstruction. And unfortunately, that takes a lot of time with the volume of data they're going to get. And I guess the big thing here that I always say, and one of the reasons I jump out very quickly with this, is it's going to take the NTSB 30 to 60 days to come out with a preliminary report. It'll be a year or two before we see the final report. Ships like this are pulling out of port every day. And maybe if we can learn a lesson real quick, maybe there's a master on a sail training ship who's going to sit there and say, you know what, hang on a second. I'm going to go a little bit slower leaving port today. When I put that engine ahead, let's kick it slow so I make sure I'm getting the propulsion I need. Maybe I'll have that extra tug on standby so that we can make sure that this doesn't happen again. Unfortunately, there's a saying in the maritime industry, all rules and regulations are written in blood. And unfortunately, it takes a tragedy at times to make changes. So what we always hope is the cadet and the Marine who died on this vessel, that we learn something from it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And apply those lessons, as you point out, Sal. Well, I'm so glad that we met. The shipping industry has never been more fascinating to me other when you talked about it, Sal. I really, you really do. You're fascinating. I appreciate the context. And thanks again for taking time to join us.
I appreciate you having me on again.